Ah, welcome back, you impossible creatures, you walking contradictions, you survivors of the unsurvivable. Yeah, I'm talking to you, the one who's sitting there right now, pretending like everything's normal, acting like you didn't just casually absorb enough trauma to collapse 3 generations, acting like you didn't walk through fire that erased entire family trees and came out the other side asking, "What's for dinner?" Do you even comprehend what you are at this point? Because I don't think you do. I don't think you've stopped long enough to realize that the amount of pain you've processed, the level of chaos you've metabolized, the sheer psychological weight you've been carrying, it would have annihilated bloodlines. Not just people, not just individuals. Entire genetic sequences would have stopped. Ancestral lines would have ended. Legacies would have been buried. And you're just here, scrolling, breathing, existing, like it's nothing. Let me paint you a picture of what should have happened. That betrayal, the one that felt like your chest was being torn open from the inside, that should have been your ending. That loss, the one that made you question if anything in this world was real, that should have been the final chapter. That abandonment, the kind that leaves you staring at walls at 4 a.m. wondering if you ever mattered to anyone, that should have been the moment you gave up. But here's the thing. You didn't break. You didn't shatter. You didn't dissolve into the void like you were supposed to. You absorbed it. All of it. Every ounce of poison, every drop of venom, every whispered lie, every silent betrayal, every moment of isolation that should have killed you, you swallowed it whole and kept walking. Do you understand how unnatural that is? Do you understand that you're functioning at a level of survival that shouldn't be possible? They don't teach this in therapy. They don't talk about this in motivational speeches. They don't have a category for people like you because you broke the scale. You survived conditions that researchers would label as incompatible with human functioning. The amount of stress you've been under, the level of emotional devastation you've endured, the psychological warfare you've navigated, it exceeds the thresholds. You should be in textbooks as a case study in impossibility. But instead, you're here. And you're not screaming. You're not burning everything down. You're not collapsing. You're just existing, quietly, calmly, with this eerie stillness that makes people uncomfortable because they can feel it. They can feel that you've been somewhere they'll never go. They can sense that you've touched something most people only experience in nightmares. And you came back. And that's what scares them. Let me tell you what really happened while everyone else was breaking at minor inconveniences, getting therapy for surface-level wounds, posting their carefully curated struggles for sympathy. You were dying and resurrecting in silence. You were going through transformations that should have required decades of healing, multiple interventions, endless support systems. But you had none of that. You had you. Just you. Alone in the dark. Processing horrors that would have sent others into permanent shutdown, and somehow you metabolized it. You turned suffering into something else. Not wisdom, not enlightenment. Something darker, something more dangerous. You turned your pain into a frequency that only certain people can hear. And those who hear it, they either run or they kneel. There's no in between anymore. Here's what they'll never tell you. That pain you absorbed, it didn't just disappear. It didn't just fade away like they promised it would. It became part of your architecture. It restructured your nervous system. It rewired your perception. It created new pathways in your consciousness that weren't there before. You're not the same species you were before all this. You're something else now, something that looks human, but operates on a completely different frequency. You walk into rooms and the energy shifts. People who've never met you feel like they need to explain themselves. Strangers get nervous. Old friends suddenly remember they have somewhere to be, because you're carrying something now, something they can't name, but they can feel. You're carrying the weight of extinctions that never happened. You're walking around with the gravitational pull of collapsed timelines. You're functioning with the quiet confidence of someone who's already died and decided to come back anyway. And the wildest part? You're just chilling. You're not flexing. You're not broadcasting your survival story. You're not writing books about your journey. You're not selling courses on resilience. You're just existing, going to work, making coffee, having conversations, like you didn't just casually survive an apocalypse that was specifically designed for you, like you didn't just walk through a personalized nightmare that would have ended dynasties. They look at you and they think you're normal. They think you're fine. They think you're just another person navigating life. They have no idea. They have no idea that you're operating on reserves that shouldn't exist. They don't know that you're running on fuel sources that science hasn't discovered yet. They can't comprehend that you've tapped into survival mechanisms that most humans never access. And you let them think that. You let them believe you're just like them, because explaining what you become would require a language that hasn't been invented yet. You want to know what happened to the others who went through what you went through? They're not here. Some are medicated into oblivion, some are in facilities, some disappeared into addictions that never ended. Some are still in therapy trying to process year 1, while you're out here on year 5 just living. Some gave up, some are still giving up. And that's not a judgment, that's just the reality. What you survived wasn't meant to be survived. The probability of you making it through intact was essentially 0. But you did it anyway, not because you're special, not because you're chosen, but because something inside you refused to give them the satisfaction. Something inside you looked at the abyss and said, "Not today." Something inside you decided that if you were going to go through this nightmare, you were going to come out the other side as something they couldn't define. Let's talk about what they expected to happen. They expected you to crumble. They expected public breakdowns. They expected social media meltdowns. They expected you to beg for help, to cry for mercy, to show them that you were just as fragile as everyone else. They wanted to see you broken because it would validate their own weakness. They wanted to watch you fail because it would justify their own limitations. They were waiting for the moment you'd crack, the moment you'd prove that no one can really survive that level of pain. But that moment never came. They burned, they burned, they burned, and they burned, and they burned. You just kept walking, you just kept processing, you just kept transmuting poison into whatever the hell you needed to keep existing. And every day you didn't break was another day they had to face the uncomfortable truth that some people are just built different. Some people metabolize darkness like it's oxygen. Some people turn devastation into fuel, and you're one of them. Now we need to address what's really going on. You're not healing. Let's be clear about that. You didn't heal. Healing is what happens when you recover and go back to who you were before. You didn't do that. You can't do that. Because who you were before doesn't exist anymore. That version of you died multiple times. You buried them. You mourned them. You said goodbye. What you did was something else entirely. You evolved under pressure that should have killed you. You adapted to conditions that weren't compatible with human consciousness. You became something new, not better, not worse, just different. Fundamentally, irreversibly different. You're operating with a nervous system that's been through extinction-level events and came out functional. You're walking around with emotional architecture that was rebuilt in the dark with no instructions. You're existing with a psychological framework that was forged in temperatures that melt normal people. And somehow, you're stable. Not perfect, not undamaged, but stable in a way that shouldn't be possible. Here's what makes you dangerous now. You don't react anymore. That's the part that unnerves people. They throw their usual manipulation tactics and you just look at them. They try their guilt trips and you don't flinch. They attempt their emotional blackmail and you remain unmoved because you've been to places they'll never see. You've survived conversations with your own darkness that would shatter their entire worldview. You've sat in silence so heavy it had gravity and you came out of it coherent. So when they try their little games, their petty dramas, their manufactured crises, you just observe, you watch, you process, and you make decisions from a place they can't access because you're not operating from hope or fear anymore. You're operating from something colder, something clearer, something that was tempered in fires they'll never know. And that makes you unpredictable. That makes you uncontrollable. That makes you free. Let me tell you what's really happening in your presence now. People feel judged, even when you're not judging them. They feel exposed, even when you're not looking at them. They feel uncomfortable, even when you're being perfectly pleasant. Why? Because you're walking proof that their excuses are just that, excuses. You're living evidence that survival is possible, even when it shouldn't be. You're breathing confirmation that the human spirit can endure things they've convinced themselves are insurmountable. Your mere existence is an indictment of their weakness, and they hate you for it. Not openly, they won't say it, but they do. They hate that you're still standing. They hate that you're not a cautionary tale. They hate that you absorbed nuclear-level devastation and came out functional, because it means they could have too. It means their breakdowns were choices. It means their surrender was optional, and they can't face that. So they avoid you, they ghost you, they keep you at arm's length. Not because you're difficult, but because you're a mirror. And they don't like what they see in that reflection. To be lonely, because that's the price, isn't it? You survived what would have erased bloodlines, but you survived it alone. You walked through that fire without a guide, without support, without anyone who can understand what you were experiencing. And even now, even after you've made it through, you're still alone. Because how do you connect with people who live on the surface when you've been to the depths? How do you have casual conversations when you've had conversations with the void? How do you care about their problems when you've solved problems they can't even comprehend? You can't. You just can't. And that's not arrogance. That's not superiority. That's just reality. You're speaking a different language now. You're operating on a different frequency. You're existing in a different dimension of experience. And most people, they just can't meet you there. They don't have the equipment. They haven't been through the initiation. They haven't paid the price of admission to that level of consciousness. So you exist in this strange liminal space, surrounded by people but fundamentally alone, understanding everything but understood by no one. But here's the twist. You don't need them anymore. That's the part you're still getting used to. You went through all of that expecting that once you survived, once you made it through, someone would be waiting on the other side to acknowledge what you've done. Someone would see you, someone would understand, someone would witness your survival and validate the magnitude of what you'd endured. But there's no one there. There's just you. And at first that felt like another betrayal, another abandonment, another confirmation that you're fundamentally alone in this existence. But then something shifted. You realized you didn't need witnesses. You didn't need validation. You didn't need anyone to understand or acknowledge or celebrate your survival. Because you know. You were there. You felt every moment of it. You lived through every second of agony that should have ended you, and that's enough. Your knowing is enough. Your private victory is enough. Your silent transformation is enough. You don't need an audience for your resurrection. You just need to keep breathing. Let's go deeper. You want to know what you became? You became the thing that nightmares check under the bed for. You became the cautionary tale that even cautionary tales warn about. You became the exception that broke the rule book and then burned the ashes. You're not a survivor in the conventional sense. Survivors hobble away with wounds and story. You walked away with something else. You walked away with a capacity for endurance that borders on the supernatural. You walked away with an ability to metabolize darkness that shouldn't be biologically possible. You walked away with a nervous system that can process chaos like it's background noise. You're not traumatized in the way they understand trauma. You're transformed. You're the human equivalent of a material that was subjected to pressures that should have destroyed it, but instead created something with properties that didn't exist before. You're the psychological equivalent of a diamond formed under conditions that erase everything else. And now you're just here, existing, with capabilities you don't fully understand and powers you haven't fully tested. Here's what they'll never admit. They're studying you, not openly, not officially, but they're watching. Your old friends, they check your social media more than they'd ever confess. Your family, they talk about you in private conversations, trying to figure out what happened, what changed, what you became. Your enemies, oh, they're obsessed. They refresh your pages. They ask mutual friends about you. They construct entire narratives trying to explain how you're still standing when they were certain you'd fall. Because your survival doesn't make sense to them. It violates their understanding of cause and effect. It breaks their models of human limitation. You should be bitter. You should be angry. You should be visibly damaged. But you're not. You're something else. Something they can't categorize. And that eats at them. That keeps them up at night. The fact that you absorbed impact that should have created a crater, and instead you're just fine. Not fine in the fake positivity way, fine in the genuinely unbothered way. fine in the way that suggests you've transcended the need for their understanding or their approval or their reality. Now we need to talk about the power you're sitting on. Because you have it, you just haven't fully weaponized it yet. You survived conditions that kill bloodlines. Do you understand what that means? It means you can survive anything they throw at you now, literally anything. Job loss, you've survived worse. Relationship ending, you've survived worse. Social exile, you've survived worse. Public humiliation, you've survived worse. Financial collapse, you've survived worse. There's nothing left in the conventional arsenal of human suffering that can touch you now. You've been through the worst-case scenario. You've lived through the nightmare that people have breakdowns just imagining. And you came out functional. So what can they do to you now? What leverage do they have? What threat carries weight? None. Nothing. You're untouchable, not because you're protected, but because you've already been through the fire, and it didn't consume you. You're invincible not because nothing can hurt you, but because you've proven you can walk through anything and come out the other side. That's the power you're carrying. That's the energy people feel when you walk into a room. You're not afraid anymore. Not of them, not of life, not of anything. Because you've already faced the worst and survived. Let's address the mutations, because that's what happened, right? You mutated, not physically, but psychologically, emotionally, spiritually. You developed adaptations that shouldn't exist. You grew capabilities that weren't in your original programming. You evolved defense mechanisms that biology hasn't documented. You can read people now in ways that make them uncomfortable. You can sense manipulation before it's spoken. You can detect lies before they're finished. You can feel energy shifts in rooms before anyone else notices. You've developed what looks like intuition, but is actually a trauma-forged radar system that processes micro-expressions, tonal variations, and behavioral patterns at superhuman speed. You've become hypersensitive to inauthenticity because you had to be. Your survival depended on it. So now you walk around with